Today, we're going to tackle a really important question that comes up all the time for nonprofit leaders. Which organizations are actually exempt from charitable solicitation registration?
We're going to break this all down in practical terms that you and your team can use. This explainer is brought to you by Ironwood Registrations.
So let's just dive right in. A question we hear constantly is, do we really have to register in every single state where we ask for donations? It seems like a straightforward question, but the answer isn't always a simple yes. The reality is, well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. The truth is, some organizations can, in fact, qualify for exemptions under certain state laws, and these can depend on the type of nonprofit you are, how much you fundraise, or even how your organization is structured.
But before we get into all the exceptions, I think it's really important to understand the rule itself. You see, most states regulate charitable fundraising for two main reasons: to promote transparency and to protect donors from any fraudulent or misleading asks.
These registration systems are all about making sure donors have access to clear information. That typically means disclosing who's leading the organization, providing financial reports, keeping public records, and of course, renewing these registrations every year. It really is all about accountability.
Okay, so let's talk about the most common type of exemption out there. This one applies to small nonprofits that have limited fundraising revenue. It's basically the state's way of saying, hey, we get it. Full registration can be a real burden for organizations with a smaller footprint.
Now, these exemptions usually kick in only under specific conditions. First, your annual fundraising has to stay below a certain dollar amount, and that amount changes from state to state. Second, you generally can't be using professional fundraisers. And third, the organization often needs to be run mostly by volunteers.
But here's a really critical piece of information that gets overlooked all the time. Being exempt doesn't always mean you do nothing. A lot of states still require you to file a short exemption notice or an application. It's a crucial step you don't want to miss.
All right, so beyond just the size of your fundraising, exemptions can also be based on your organization's mission and structure. Let's take a look at a few of the most common types you'll see.
Many states provide exemptions for religious organizations, so churches and ministries that are directly integrated with them are often exempt from registration. However, and this is a big however, the legal definition of a religious organization can be very, very different from one state to the next.
It's a similar story for educational institutions. Public schools, universities, and some educational foundations might qualify for an exemption, but it's not automatic. It often depends on whether the institution is publicly funded or operates under a larger university system.
And the same logic applies to certain healthcare organizations. Hospitals, for instance, might be exempt, especially if they're already regulated by other state health agencies. The idea here is to avoid redundant oversight.
Now, this is where things can get really tricky. All of these different state-level exemptions can create a false sense of security, especially for organizations that are fundraising on a national level.
Let's look at a quick example. An organization might be well under a $50,000 fundraising threshold in State A, which makes them exempt there. But in State B, that threshold could be just $25,000, which means they'd actually have to register. This is exactly why you have to evaluate your status on a state-by-state basis.
And as if that wasn't complicated enough, online fundraising has added a whole other layer of complexity. Think about it. When your Donate Now button is available to anyone online, where are you actually soliciting?
So the crucial point is this: soliciting online can trigger registration requirements in any state where your donors happen to live. Your physical headquarters might be in a state where you're exempt, but if your campaign is actively reaching donors in other states, you may be required to register there.
Okay, so what do you do about all this? Let's dive into some practical steps your organization should take. How can you confidently figure out where you stand? It really comes down to a methodical review.
Here's a pretty clear 5-step process. First, know your numbers. What is your annual fundraising revenue? Second, are you using any professional fundraisers? Third, what is your official organizational type? Fourth, and this is the big one, you have to check the specific rules for every single state where you solicit donations. And finally, step 5, confirm whether you still need to file an exemption notice to stay in compliance.
Ultimately, it all comes down to this. While exemptions can apply to some nonprofits, the rules vary so significantly. For any organization that's soliciting across state lines, a state-by-state review isn't just good practice. It's absolutely essential for maintaining compliance and building trust with your donors.
Thank you so much for watching. For more resources on multi-state fundraising compliance, please visit ironwoodregistrations.com.